So Bryan Johnson, the founder and CEO of Braintree, was on Lex Fridman's podcast, and Lex Fridman asked him about the meaning of life, and this is what he says. I think it's kind of fascinating.
What do you think is the meaning of this whole thing, of life?
Our technological progress is getting to a point where we could aspirationally say we want to figure out what is really going on. Because does any of this really make sense? Now, we may be 100, 200, 500, 1,000 years away from being able to poke our way out of whatever is going on. But I'd say in this moment of time, the meaning of life is that we can build a future state of existence that is more fantastic than anything we could ever imagine.
So what's fascinating about this is his assumption, his presupposition about what it would take for us to understand what was the meaning or purpose of existence. And he says that we would have to be able to poke ourselves out of this world. That is to say that his sort of governing assumption is that the meaning or the purpose of this world is outside this world. But then he goes on later on to say, well, like from what we know, it's like X, Y, and Z, right? So that is to say that we have like some sort of hint, some sort of sense of what the purpose of life is, and we can kind of do this until we can poke our heads through the edge of this to the other world and sort of figure out what this is all about. Now, what's fascinating about this is how sort of true these assumptions are, right? But first, let's ask about like if we were asking about meaning or purpose, what would it even mean to answer that question? And sometimes people, I think, unduly struggle with this question. Be like, oh, how would you answer this? And like, what kind of answer would this be? So Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy will say, it's 42 and stuff like this, right? But no. The funny thing is this has been sitting in front of us the whole time. We understand how purpose works. We encounter it 10,000 times in a day. And here's what it is. Purpose is an intention in the mind of a person that then designs things, objects out in the world, social or physical, and instantiates that purpose in the object if it's designed well. So what are some examples? So you think about like a toothbrush, right? You can look at a toothbrush, you can see, oh, well, there's a handle and there's these like bristles and right. And you can start to sort of figure out, even if you have no context, like what this is for. Well, it's probably supposed to like brush something, right? And you can read the purpose off the object, or you can get close to it. You get hinting into this thing, right? Or you think about, let's say, like a stop sign, right? And you say, okay, we'll see some letters on here. Since it's red, so it's supposed to like grab our attention. It normally sits at these certain places, and you can read the purpose, the meaning of this off this. Now, of course, purposes are nested in other purposes, so these things sort of recurse at other levels as you go up. So the toothbrush will be probably next to toothpaste, which has a purpose, those two things together, that's on a sink, and that whole thing has a larger purpose to sort of take care of yourself, where these two things were just for like right here. Then you have other things that are for like the rest of your face, right? And then you move out into toilet. So all of these have purpose, higher and higher level purposes, and you can sort of like work up through that, right? So that's how purpose functions. Now you may say, oh, no, when you get to like the purpose of all purposes, the purpose, it's different. Well, of course, that's always possible. But the problem with that argument is that the only reason sort of we ask the question because we like sort of encounter all these things all the time. I mean, there's like the existential aspect too, but we encounter this all the time. So if you want to say, well, no, it's fundamentally different when you get up to the top level. You're like, okay, but you're going to need like a very strong argument for that, right? And it's kind of like there's an argument that one philosopher made who said, like if you're arguing against moral realism, the problem is that any premise you offer for that argument is going to be less intuitive than the reality of morals, right? So it's going to have to be so strong. So if you say, purpose is like fundamentally different from how we experience purposes 1,000 times every day, it's possible, but it's going to just be a hard argument to make, right? But what gets fascinating is when you talk about this other aspect. So you have these like hinting of purposes, but you also have this aspect that the sense of Bryan's that, it's outside of the world, right? And we'll be able to find it once we can like poke our head outside the world. So let's think about this as an analogy. So it's like as like a character in a story. So you think about like Romeo, and you ask Romeo, if you're like, hey Romeo, what's your purpose? And he would probably say, well, my purpose is to get Juliet, right? Like to win her, to woo her, right? And then you can ask a higher order question, be like, okay, so that's your purpose right now. But what's the purpose of like your whole life, right? And maybe he could say, well, it's sort of this large exposition on love that you could see. Maybe he could put that together, you know. But what would be even better to truly find out would be to have the author enter into Shakespeare's world, poking his head into that world and telling him what his intention was. So the reality of meaning or purpose being outside the world is absolutely true. And it's also true that there are hints in the world that we can look to for its purpose. Thanks so much for checking out the video this week. I really do appreciate it. Let me know what you think. I'll see you in the next video.